Happy Juneteenth, Bobcats, alumni, community members, and anyone else who has joined us on this very important day. I'm Dr. Sherry Ben, Assistant Vice President and Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion, and I have the pleasure of serving as your Mistress of Ceremony throughout today. Now, before we get started with the program, I have to give two shout outs. One to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, on that DACA decision. That's definitely something I'm celebrating with our DACA sisters, brothers, siblings, and family members. That has to come as a huge relief to many of our outstanding Texas State students and members of SCOPE. Shout out to SCOPE. The other big shout out that I want to give is to Student Diversity and Inclusion and the Division of Information Technology. Those two teams, I want to appreciate them for all of their hard work in coordinating all of the complex details that went into the development of today's program. Without those two groups, the idea for this event would never have manifested into a reality. Of course, our speakers, panelists, moderators, performers, and artists must be thanked for their participation because they provide the content and interactive element, along with me, of today's program. So a couple of housekeeping items. This is going to be a bit less formal than what you're probably used to with regard to programs, and that's because it's virtual, and most of us are either in our homes, at our desks, so it'll be a little bit less formal than what you're used to. Additionally, something else that you need to know is that there will be pauses between sessions. When that happens, we will move to a PowerPoint screen slide with music. So when you hear music or you see a PowerPoint slide, that's happening because we're in transition. All right. Okay, so now we're going to get started. On behalf of the many sponsors of this event, which will be highlighted at the conclusion of today's program, we welcome you to a Texas State First, a day of reflection and solidarity, which honors Juneteenth. So many of you may have asked yourself or may still be asking, why should I take part in a day of reflection and solidarity on Juneteenth? I would ask you to consider a different question. Why would you not take part in a day that calls upon us as a community to critically think about, discuss, and challenge ourselves to consider our collective obligation to act in solidarity one with another in the 400+ year struggle for racial justice and equality in a country that espouses a creed of liberty and justice for all? These issues are a continuing challenge, right? So here's the deal. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is the cavalry's coming. The bad news is we are the cavalry. So I must say, in this gripping reality, that thinking about all that's come to light most recently, right, in the news, through social media, Twitter, Instagram, regarding the historically prevailing issues of racial injustice that many of us have been living with all of our lives, as were our parents and grandparents and ancestors, we have been touched and moved by this new generation carrying on the torch of justice with purpose and relentless determination that I would venture to say we probably have not seen in a communal fashion since the civil rights movement. And the beauty of this generation is that they are leading an intersectional, trans-identity, intergenerational coalition of change agents. Thank you, Gen Z and millennials. All right, so to provide the opening address for our Juneteenth Day of reflection and solidarity is our university president, who's been at the helm of Texas State since 2002. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Denise Trouth.
Thank you, Dr. Ben, and welcome all of you. It is my great honor to welcome you to a day of reflection and solidarity. And I am particularly grateful, I want to say at the outset, to Dr. Ben, who is the Assistant Vice President and Director of the Student Diversity and Inclusion, organized this powerful event. I'm also grateful, as Dr. Ben said, to the Division of IT who made this event happen, and also to the presenters who are going to participate today with their voices, their stories, and their knowledge. As I thought about how to begin my remarks this morning, I was looking over some materials I had that go back 5 decades to when I was a college student. And I found something that I wrote then that I'd like to share with you today. And just so you understand, I was a sophomore, and this is my sophomore metaphor. In the piece I'm going to share with you, I compared racism to a disease. And I quote from myself, "Americans are alarmed, and Black Americans suffering from a life of civil rights struggles in a summer of smoke have seen their pain laid bare by the report of the Commission on Civil Disorders. White racism, stark and fatal, has been diagnosed. Now, a national examination of conscience and some planned programs of treatment will be tried to assuage the pain and cure the ailment. But as sufferers of the crippling effects of apathy, prejudice, or indifference, we find it necessary to question the state of our national response to the racial crisis. We find excuses insipid, promises ineffectual, and remedies evasive. We discover ultimately that there's an anemia in the principles to which we are committed. And most frightening of all, we realize there are no tonics or easy answers. People are screaming for relief. Frustration and exhaustion have used up their patience and pressed them to revolt." And that ends the passage that I wrote in 1967. What I found amazing about these words as I reviewed them recently is that they could have been written yesterday. And they beg us to answer the question, what have we accomplished during the intervening 5 decades? The report referenced in my college writing was the work of the Kerner Commission, appointed by our Texas State alumnus and the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. He appointed this commission to identify the cause of the violent riots in 1967. Those riots killed 43 people in Detroit, 26 people in Newark, and led to casualties in 23 other American cities. The Kerner Commission reported that poverty and institutional racism were driving violence. Pent-up frustrations boiled over in many Black neighborhoods during the mid to late 1960s, setting off riots that raged. The report pointed to a flawed justice system, policing practices, unscrupulous consumer credit practices, poor or inadequate housing, high unemployment, voter suppression, and other culturally embedded forms of racial discrimination that all converged to propel violent upheaval on the streets of Black neighborhoods in American cities. The Kerner Commission declared that white racism, not Black anger, was at the root of America's urban turmoil, and included these words in the final report, and I quote, "White society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it. White institutions maintain it, and white society condones it." The commission warned that the country was so divided that the United States was poised to fracture into two radically unequal societies, one Black, one white. These prophetic words in the Kerner report are as chilling now as they were 50 years ago when I first read them. And all the more so because we, white people, did not heed this warning. And Black people and Black communities have paid a deadly price. Although I've never experienced it myself, I bear witness to the fractured, unequal, and unjust society that to this day oppresses people of color. I feel responsibility for it, and I'm deeply angered by it, but that's not enough. Once again, as we have far too many times in this nation, we find ourselves at the crossroads of words and actions regarding equality and justice for Black people. At Texas State, we will choose action. We have talented and passionate diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders across the university who've been instrumental in building a strong foundation in diversity, equity, and inclusion excellence at Texas State. With their guidance, we've taken a number of steps to support diversity and build inclusion throughout our university community. We elevated the position of Chief Diversity Officer to the President's Cabinet to provide insights and direction on policy and decisions. We introduced minors in African American Studies and Latina and Latino Studies. We implemented the Capacity Building Action Plan, which outlined nearly 100 steps we've taken to strengthen diversity, equity, and inclusion. We launched the Bias Response Protocol to give all Bobcats a voice in documenting incidents of discrimination, bias, and prejudice. We established the Council for Inclusive Excellence, started a new Diversity and Inclusion Certificate program for faculty and staff, commissioned the permanent LGBTQIA Advisory and Resource Network, opened the Texas Monarch Center for immigrant students, and have focused specifically on developing programs that promote the recruitment and promotion of faculty and staff of color. And most recently, with the priority to advance and elevate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts across the whole of Texas State University, we completed a comprehensive review of the university's DE&I organizational structure to guide how we move forward to strengthen the framework of support for our faculty, staff, and students, and amplify the powerful work being done by our DE&I professionals on our campuses. And next week, I'll share more with the university community about changes that we are making to create synergy to do even more and achieve profound institutional level change. But there is so much more to do, and there is an urgency in this mission. And in the spirit of solidarity, we will work together. Our students, faculty, and staff of color will not carry the burden of calling for equality and justice alone. Racism was instigated and propagated by white culture and institutions, and it is not the responsibility of people of color to fix it. We commit to being more than non-racist at Texas State. We will be anti-racist. We will have community conversations that invite uncomfortable and courageous dialogues. We will continue to create and revise policies and procedures that support our culture of inclusion. And although reflection is necessary for the healing process, it is not meant to be easy. Examining our own prejudice, bias, and privilege is key to awakening, to raising consciousness, to doing things differently. I know that I have blind spots. This university has blind spots. In the past, I approached inclusiveness as inviting people of color to take part in a white dominant culture. But I've learned that I was wrong. I've learned that inclusion is much more intentional and nuanced. True inclusion and equity require us to build and nurture a culture of meaningful equality in which our students, faculty, and staff of color have the same unfettered access to success, to justice, to safety, and to opportunity. And one of the most important actions I can take is to listen to you, our community. I appreciate the fact that the faculty of color engaged in a listening session with me and the provost last week to share your feelings and concerns. I heard that our faculty, staff, and students of color are exhausted, stressed, anxious. They are in pain. Many shared that they lived dual lives. They work or go to school and then come home back into their communities and live a life burdened by injustice and unfairness. Many live in fear. Many feel powerless. And some do not feel welcomed at Texas State. I hear their pain and I move to action by it. I am more resolved than ever before to stand with and act on behalf of our faculty, staff, and students of color. I may be limited to what I can change at the national level, but I can and will make a difference at Texas State. As we hold this day of reflection and solidarity, I know the truths, experiences, and self-expression shared today will help us and guide our way forward. It's important that this day of reflection and solidarity is being held on Juneteenth, the historic time in 1865 when slaves in Texas learned they were free through the public reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's our calling as an institution of higher learning to provide the educational environment that recognizes and in fact celebrates our common humanity and prepares our students to not only lead in a global society, but to be the change makers. To the students joining us, you will lead us into a future that seeks and shapes equality and justice for all. And I look forward to what I will learn with you and from you. So let me end by thanking all of you for participating today, for your hope, and for your willingness to make a difference.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Trouth. And I see you drawn back to your 20s from when you were in college. All right. So I want to thank you for those reflections and those important and powerful words of challenge, hard truth, and solidarity. Those were some very anti-racist sentiments and expressions that you drew upon from your 20s and you made relevant with regard to what we're dealing with today. So also, I want to thank you for reminding us that this day of reflection and solidarity holds particular significance. It was on June 19, 1865, that Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Texas with news that the Civil War had ended and that the enslaved people of African descent were free. Now, mind you, you know your history, then you know that June 19, 1865 was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. I would venture to say that Juneteenth is as important to our national history as is the 4th of July, since it commemorates the day in which enslaved people of Texas, then the most distant region of the Confederacy, were the last enslaved descendants of Africans to learn that slavery had been abolished and that they were free. As was then, and the frustration that is now, the wheels of change do seem to turn ever so and too slowly.